Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Burney, and I'm the Outreach Archivist here at the State Archives. And before we get started with our speaker and hearing all the great stuff about how to do research in the General Assembly Session Records Collection, I want to start out with a brief overview of the State Archives. State Archives began in 1903 when the Historical Commission started. And today, the North Carolina Historical Commission is part of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So this is the building where we are in a very prominent spot on Jones Street between the Legislative Building, where the General Assembly meets, and the Governor's Mansion. So hopefully you're familiar with us and have done research here, but maybe this session today will inspire you to come and visit us in the future. A little bit about our collection, which is huge. It's really too big to count, but our best estimate is that we preserve over 100 million records. And we have a staff of 70 to help preserve those and provide access to the public for those records. We collect the records of government agencies like the General Assembly, but we're one of a minority of state archives that also collects donations from private individuals and organizations. So we have a wide range of materials, not just documents, but also audiovisual materials, including film and sound recordings and photographs. We have 2 branches, and all 3 of those sites are open to the public for research 5 days a week. In Raleigh, we're open from Tuesday through Saturday, Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 5, and most Saturdays, 9 to 1. We will be closed this Saturday for Memorial Day weekend. And our branches are open Monday through Friday for hours to the public as well. So definitely check those websites if you plan to go to the branch locations for their specific hours. And together with the State Library, we maintain a large digital collection. It's really still just a small portion of our holdings, but we're putting more and more there all the time. It's about 100,000, I think, items in that collection, currently growing fast. And we also put a lot of photographs on Flickr and some of our recordings on YouTube. So check out all of those areas for primary sources. We have a rich collection of those. Okay, we'll hear more about an aspect of the digital collection today from my colleague, Lauren McCoy, and I'm so happy she's here to share her expertise with us. She is the Archives digital archivist for online programming, and she's been in that position almost 2 years. But before she moved into that position, she was a reference archivist for over 4 years. So she really knows the ins and outs of how to help people find things in easy collections and difficult collections. So thanks for being here today to share the knowledge on a difficult collection, Lauren.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining me today. The General Assembly Session Records are probably my favorite collection at the State Archives. I think they're a wonderful, rich, and underutilized collection. When I worked in public services, my fellow staff members would often pass on requests related to this collection to me because they knew I enjoyed the puzzle of trying to figure out where to look. And so I'm excited to kind of share what I learned with you today. So in this presentation, over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to cover a little bit about the history of the General Assembly, what's included in these records and how they are arranged, how to use the catalog and digital collections as they relate to these records, and of course, how to use resources like the House and Senate journals to successfully perform your research. We'll cover a few examples and try to leave the last 15 minutes available for questions. So, though we do not have records from the earliest years of the General Assembly, we know that it probably first met in 1665 at the General Assembly of Albemarle County in the province of Carolina. From its beginning until the mid-1690s, it was unicameral, meaning that it was a single body composed of the governor, his council, and elected members. In 1689, Albemarle County was dissolved and the province became known as North Carolina. The legislature was changed, dividing into an upper house composed of the governor's council and a lower house composed of elected representatives. In 1728, the Crown assumed government of all North Carolina, with a small exception, following the sale of the colony by the Lords Proprietors. There was one Lords Proprietor who retained his property for a while. The name of the lower house was interchangeable during this period, sometimes called the lower house, sometimes called the House of Burgesses. During this period, the royal governor had the ability to veto any bills passed by the Assembly. In 1776, the state of North Carolina ratified their first state constitution, revoking most of the power that the governor had over the legislature. The upper house was renamed the Senate, and the lower house became the House of Commons. In 1794, following the establishment of Raleigh as the permanent state capital, the Assembly began meeting in Raleigh. In 1868, a new state constitution was ratified, and the House of Commons was renamed the House of Representatives and remains that to this day. Until about 1875, legislative sessions typically began in November of an odd year, but in 1875 that was changed to January of odd years. And in 1963, the Assembly held their first meeting in the current legislative building on Jones Street, which is just to my left, about a block. The State Archives has records from the General Assembly up to 2014, but only the records up to 1992 are processed and available on site at the State Archives. Records past that date will require a request to Public Services unit to locate and pull for you. From the colonial period to about 1900, the Assembly records include a variety of types of records, including tally sheets, election certificates, legislative messages, and more, although the bulk of the records are the bills, resolutions, and committee reports. Those last three, plus petitions, bills, resolutions, petitions, and committee reports, are the types that continue to be saved into the 20th century. With the exception of 1949, petitions are not included after 1931. Committee reports are only occasionally included up to about 1935. And there are just a couple of committee records that were particularly included in the 73 to 74 session. So we know what types of records are included. What subjects do they cover? Well, naturally, there's a lot of different topics that are covered in the lifespan of a state legislature. Some topics related particularly to genealogy include adoption, divorce, and emancipation. For many years, the General Assembly was the only body that could change names, approve adoptions, legitimize children, grant divorces, or grant emancipation and manumission requests. Also, if you're researching Revolutionary War ancestors, there's a good number of records related to Revolutionary War service, memorials, pensions, and relief for widows, those kinds of things. Other topics that may be of interest include the incorporation and thus original charters of towns, schools, and businesses, the establishment of new counties and courts, the governance of hunting and fishing, petitions from religious minorities, bills, resolutions, and petitions related to relationships with indigenous peoples, and changes to North Carolina's laws and constitution. Of course, this is just an overview of some of the types of subjects you can expect to find being handled by the General Assembly. There are many, many more. For example, if you are studying railroads in the 19th century, you'll definitely want to check out the General Assembly session records, as the legislature set the charters and governed the regulations surrounding railroads for most of that time period. Before diving into how to search these records, it is really important to understand how they are all arranged. Generally speaking, the files are arranged by session and then by type of record, so that part is easy. Within each session, however, the organization of bills, petitions, resolutions, and committee reports can change. Committee reports can be divided by the type or the title of the committee. For example, Committee on Propositions and Grievances, and then a separate folder for Committee on Divorce and Alimony. And similarly, petitions could be filed together, all together and just arranged by date or separated out by subject. There are many years where you might have, for example, petitions related to railroads, petitions related to liquor, petitions related to the Revolutionary War that are separate from the rest of the miscellaneous petitions. In general, though, within the division of subject or type, they're always going to be arranged by date. Bills and resolutions is where there is the most change. From 1773 to 1790, the bills are organized by date and also separated and labeled individually. They are described in our catalog as well, which I'll show you in a little bit. So it can be pretty easy to locate specific records during that time period because they are actually described in the catalog at an item level. From 1791 to 1855, bills are just organized by date. Typically, they're organized by the date the bill was enrolled or ratified, or the date it passed its first reading. Beginning in 1856 and continuing through the present, bills and resolutions are organized by number. There's also a brief period in the late 1850s through the late 1860s where they are also divided into public and private, and I'll go over that a bit more later. Finally, beginning in 1975, bills are divided into passed and failed. Before this date, bills were all filed together, whether or not they passed. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on how to research materials from mostly the 19th century because that's where it gets the most complex. It's important to note, however, that during the colonial period and even after, there were a lot of records that did not get saved. There's no guarantee that we'll have a record, even if you find mention of a particular bill or petition in, say, a newspaper or something. Sometimes for unknown reasons, we have the bills, but not the related petitions, messages regarding petitions, but no petition, etc. I also want to say at this juncture that I know this is a lot of information, and there is a handout that is going to be made available whether you are watching live right now or watching the recorded version on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, there should be a link in the description, and if you're watching live, then a link should be sent out to you either tomorrow or sometime early next week. So you don't have to memorize all of this information, in particular this slide, which is pretty important. Right now, you will have access to this information later. So I want to briefly demonstrate how you can view information about the early session records in our catalog, and also how you can view them online in the digital collections. So first, in the catalog, start by using the keyword search General Assembly Record Group. The first result with record ID 66 and the title of General Assembly Record Group is what we're looking for. So if you select that, you'll get taken to the catalog entry for the General Assembly Record Group. This scope and content note gives a thorough history of the General Assembly. A lot of the history that I explained comes from this. You'll find this for any state agency. And then the child records will explain the different series of different types of records within this record group. So we'll select that now to view a different series. There are 39 series in this collection, several of which have been deaccessioned, as you can see. But what we're looking for are the session records from the General Assembly. There's a lot of other types of records that come from the General Assembly. Today, we are solely talking about these session records. And that is Series 8. So selecting that, we'll get taken to the series page, which again has another scope and content note that explains what you can expect from the series. Take note also of the access restriction note, which explains, as I said earlier, that records from 1993 to 2014 are unprocessed and require additional time to pull. Selecting child records down here allows us to see the sub-series, which are session-based. On the left, you can see the series title, indicating what type of session it is. And on the right, the date to and from columns, or from and to columns, tells you what to expect in that series. We'll select the series at the bottom of this snapshot, the session of April to May 1777 as an example. So once we select that, we're looking at the records from this session of April to May 1777. And these 17 child records describe the different types of records that are included in this session: joint papers, messages, miscellaneous bills, resolutions, committee papers, etc. And if you were to scroll down a little bit, if this was live, I could scroll down a little bit, you'll see House Joint Resolutions Folder 1. So we'll look at that. And now we're looking at the specific items that are in a specific folder. So this is what is called item level description. And this item level description, which describes each document in the folder, in each box, for every folder in each box that makes up the session, is only available for records from 1709 to 1790. And the great thing about these early records is that they're in our digital collections. So the records from 1709 to 1814 are included in the North Carolina Digital Collections under the collection General Assembly Session Records. As Adrian stated earlier, the Digital Collections is a joint project of the State Library and State Archives. And this is the home page. And if you were to scroll down, you'd see that the collections are all in alphabetical order, and you can select General Assembly Session Records. This will take you to a spotlight page for the collection, where you can read a little bit more about it and browse the records. You can also perform a keyword search using this highlighted box, arrange your search results by title or by date, filter the results by date or date range, and finally select a title of a record to view it. So for example, say I wanted to view the records related to Ned Griffin, an enslaved man who was offered emancipation in exchange for fighting in the Revolutionary War, was then denied it later by his owner, but successfully petitioned the General Assembly to receive his freedom. I know that this is during the time period when records are individually described because it's 1784. So it's a good opportunity to use the keyword search, Ned Griffin. Doing so quickly brings me to the item I'm looking for here, this first result, Senate bill to give Ned Griffin his freedom. This viewing page has a lot of different features on it that I'll show in a minute, but I want to point out before we move on that you'll see the title says May 15, Senate bill to give Ned Griffin his freedom, petition and messages only. So this document is not actually the bill. It is actually only the petition and messages, but it's filed under the bills. I don't know where the bill is. This happens occasionally. It is a good example of the fact that petitions and messages sometimes will be found with their respective bills rather than in the petitions folder. For one more example, a 1799 petition, which is fondly nicknamed the Werewolf Petition here at the State Archives. Since it's from 1799, I know that those records are not individually described, so I know that I'll have to browse through an entire folder of scanned petitions. Still, I'll use the keyword search petition and narrow my search results to 1799 using the filter over here on the left. And this brings me multiple results because in 1799, when these records are being processed, not in 1799, but when the records from 1799 were being processed sometime in the 20th century, the petitions were divided by subject. Since I know that the Werewolf Petition doesn't concern sheriffs, taxes, land, or the Revolutionary War, I feel like it's a pretty safe bet to select petitions miscellaneous. Now, I'm taken to that same type of page that we saw earlier where you can actually view and interact with the records. So some features of this page include a keyword search that is usable for records that have been transcribed. So these records have not been transcribed, but many records in the digital collections have, or OCR transcription has been used on them. Then I can move through the pages here, browse thumbnails of the images on the side, download a PDF, JPEG, or PNG of the scan, and down here at the bottom, I can scroll down for more details. Because I'm familiar enough with this petition to recognize it, I used the Browse Images feature to go directly to it. I can use these highlighted tools to zoom in and read the cursive close-up, open it in full screen, and more. Recently, the State Archives published a research guide for a portion of the session records, a guide to the session records of marginalized communities from 1779 to 1777, to 1789. This guide identifies specific records from this collection related to women, enslaved and free people of color, American Indians, and religious minority groups. All of the materials referenced in this guide are in the digital collections, and you can access it on our website by going to Researchers, Finding Aids, and then selecting Research Guides. All right. Hopefully I'm not moving too fast through this, but next it is time to talk about the House and Senate journals. So available in the digital collections, courtesy of the State Library, are the House and Senate journals, the published House and Senate journals, which are essential for successful research in the 19th century and really into the 20th as well. The House and Senate journals record the daily activities of each house, including elections, votes, governor's messages, and more. The detail of what's included diminishes as time goes on, especially into the late 19th and early 20th centuries. For example, in the early 19th century, the text of proposed amendments to bills and resolutions may be included in the printed journal, while in the late 19th century, you'd just be able to see that an amendment was proposed. In addition to providing you with important information to help you locate original documents, the journals can reveal who introduced bills, who voted for and against, called the yeas and nays, who suggested changes to bills, and so on. Since the journals are digitized, you can use full text searching in the digital collections. However, it's important to be aware that OCR, optical character recognition software, is not infallible. And the journals are not indexed until 1862, and even so, they may not be indexed in a way that's helpful to you. Often the index only includes references to the yeas and nays, which will give you only 1 or maybe 2 points of information on a bill. And as we'll discuss in a moment, there are several questions you need to find the answers to in the journals. So when using the journals, what are you looking for? Well, when you're beginning your research into a General Assembly session record, you need to consider the time period. Mainly, if you're looking for a bill or resolution, whether you need to know a specific date or a number. This information can usually be found in the House and Senate journals. If you're looking for a record from a session between 1791 to 1855, then you should look for and write down the following dates: introduction of the bill, resolution or petition, dates it was voted on, when it was enrolled and or ratified. Whether you need a date or a bill number, as long as you are looking for a bill or resolution, you should always be sure to make note of whether it was first brought up in the House or in the Senate, because that's where it's going to be filed. Bills are often given both House and Senate numbers, but it will always be filed with the body that first brought it up. And if you're looking specifically for a petition, no matter whether that's during the time period when bills are numbered or not, you should always try to find the date when it is first introduced, because petitions are typically organized by date. Of course, if you're looking for a bill or resolution for a session in which bills were numbered, that'd be 1855 to present, you should look for the bill number. But be aware that the bill numbers may not be introduced until late in the session. Between 1858 and 1868, you should look for any indication if it is a public or a private bill. Private bills may be set apart with a P in the bill number, and I'll show you an example of that later. Finally, pay attention to whether or not the bill or resolution, petition, committee report, etc., gets tabled in committee. Tabling, or laid on the table, means that the legislature is deciding to set it aside and not pick it back up, or at least not pick it back up for an indefinite period. So you've gathered your information. What now? First, do you start with the Senate or House records? Well, where was it first introduced? What does your research say? If the records are arranged by date, where do you start? Well, look at your important dates that you wrote down, start with the enrollment date, and then move through the other dates if it's not there. It could be under the date it was first introduced, or most likely the first date it was voted on. What if the records are arranged by number? Hopefully, you were able to identify a bill or resolution number. If you can't find a bill number in the journals, or if it's not filed under the bill number you found, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to look for a lot of records. For some years, there may be a folder of unnumbered bills, but more often than not, if you cannot find a number, you're going to need to look through basically all the records until you find it. Now, what if it's during 1858 to 1868 when Senate bills and House bills were arranged by public and private? Well, hopefully there's some indication, like the inclusion of the letter P in the number for private, as I said, but you might just need to start with the number you found in the journal, try it for under public, and then if it's not there, you might have to start looking at the private bills. Finally, what if you can't find a ratification date or a bill number? Well, that's where I would check if it got tabled in committee. Like I said, basically meaning that the legislature decided to indefinitely postpone discussing it. For records arranged by date, look at some of the other dates that it's associated with, then move to the committee reports. Often you can find petitions or drafts of bills in the committee reports. And like I said, for records arranged by bill number, there might be a folder of unnumbered bills. Otherwise, I'd also suggest checking petitions and committee reports. Unfortunately, working with the General Assembly session records involves understanding the basic rules of how to navigate them, but also always being prepared for the occasional rule breaker. So petitions may not be in the petitions folder. They may be found accompanying related bills, resolutions, or committee reports, or they may not survive at all. Bills might be filed on a date adjacent to one of your important dates. Say it was first introduced on December 6th. Maybe you find it in the December 7th folder instead of December 6th. The number in the journal might be different from the number in the box. And the number might only be found in one of the journals. There's quite a few examples where, for whatever reason, the Senate journal does not record bill numbers, but the House journal does. And then the journal indexes may not include all of the relevant page numbers. They may be in the middle of the journal. If the journals are combined into one volume, you might start with the journal, the Senate journal, and then index, and then following it is the House journal and then the index. And the index also may only be to the yays and nays. Before we dive into some examples where we'll spend the rest of our time together, I want to first point out a couple of research hiccups. First, as you may have noticed, there's a gap between when the records are described at the item level in the catalog and when the published House and Senate journals first become available, about 30 years from 1791 to 1822. Unfortunately, that just means for those years, you'll need to look through more records. You may need to look through all of the House bills if you don't have a date. However, the amount of records, it's not as bulky as it becomes later in the 19th century. So it should be manageable. You may also need to rely more on secondary sources for information about potential records. However, the potential issue with secondary sources is what I like to call the LP problem. So when the session records were first transferred to the state archives, they, along with other records from the legislature, were organized under the collection Legislative Papers and assigned call numbers that began with LP. You can still see these citations in places like the Delamar transcripts, which is what I have pictured here. The Delamar transcripts are transcripts of records in the session records related to Revolutionary War, soldiers, etc. The index on the right here gives you the LP number, and which is basically the box number, and a page number to where the transcription is. But finding the original off of this information can be difficult. The problem is that the records were reprocessed, they were refoldered and reboxed later in the 20th century. So these citations are no longer helpful. So unfortunately, even if you have that citation, you're still going to need to go through the steps that we're going to go over in order to locate the document. But the good thing is, you know it exists, or at least existed at some point in the last 100 years. All right, let's move on to some examples. So we'll spend the next chunk of time together on these examples. And I'll spend the most time on the first example, a divorce petition and bill from the 1826 to 1827 session, because I also want to show you how to search the journals in the digital collections. So starting from the same homepage we saw earlier, scroll down to State Publications Collection and select it. And then from the Spotlight page, select the House and Senate Journals link. Now you can narrow your search results or search or sort by date. I like to sort by date ascending, but you can also use the filter on the side to narrow your results to particular years. So scrolling down, I reached the journal I'm looking for, the 1826 to 1827 session. You'll notice that it says Journals of the Senate and House of Commons. Most of the earlier journals are combined and printed in one volume. Up here at the top right, we can do a full text search of this journal because it's been transcribed. If you use multiple words in your keyword search, it'll look for everywhere that any of those words come up, unless you use quotation marks, which makes it specifically look for those words together. So that's what I'm doing here, looking for Eliza Hope Cox. We're looking for information surrounding her divorce petition in 1826-27. The hits arrows over here on the left allow me to move between the places that this keyword search shows up in the transcription, while the arrows to the right of that allow me to move page to page as normal. So this first result shows us that her petition for divorce from her husband was presented first in the House of Commons on January 1st, and that it was then referred to the Committee on Divorce and Alimony. The next result takes us to a report from the Committee on Divorce and Alimony, stating that they found Eliza's petition, along with a few others, to be reasonable, and recommended a bill titled "A Bill to Divorce Certain Persons Therein Named," that it be passed to allow their divorces. From the start of the new day following this report, where it says Friday, January 19th, we know that this report was given to the General Assembly on Thursday, January 18th. So picking up that title, I start a new search for "Bill to Divorce Certain Persons" and find the first time that it was read in the House of Commons. Bills and resolutions are read and voted on 3 times in each body. If going back a few pages, I can see that it took place on February 7th, so I record that date. Next, I find that it was read the second and third times and sent to the Senate for concurrence. This is an example of the yeas and nays. Now, these were not recorded with the first reading. And if you see here, it says the yeas and nays called for by Mr. Webb. The yeas and nays were not recorded unless it was requested that they be recorded in the journal. And so you're not always going to find that for every bill, and definitely not for every reading. And again, I have to go back a few pages where I can see that this is taking place on February 8th. So moving backwards to the Senate Journal, we can see that it was received and passed the first reading. Again, going back a few pages in the browser, we can see that this took place on February 9th. You'll also often see this in the journal where a lot of bills are spoken about at the same time. So that the Senate is saying that they've received this message from the House of Commons, saying that they've passed bills, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and then it says the bills and resolutions were read the first time and passed. And then this is a great example of the fact that optical character recognition is not flawless. There's no hit that indicates that the Senate ever passed this bill and ordered it enrolled. However, when I move just one page over from the last page we were on and carefully scan it, we can find it mentioned again at the end of the page. You can see that the ink has faded, which is probably why it didn't get picked up. But it was read the second and third times, passed, and ordered to be enrolled on February 9th. So to recap, on January 1st, Eliza's petition was introduced in the House of Commons and referred to the Committee on Divorce and Alimony. Just a couple weeks later, it was reported as reasonable by the committee, and I will say there are many divorce petitions in this session, and only a select few were determined to be reasonable by this committee. The bill, which will eventually grant her divorce, is proposed on February 7th and is ordered passed by the House on February 8th and ordered passed by the House and enrolled on February 9th, or by the Senate, rather. So, taking this information, let's try to find the original records at the State Archives. So, beginning with the petition, I started by checking the petitions for 1826 to 1827, but I was not able to find anything. So I asked myself, well, is there a folder for the Committee on Divorce and Alimony? The answer was yes, so I dived into that folder and was rewarded not only with her petition, but with a copy of the committee report on her petition. As for finding the original bill, I, of course, began with the House bills, since the petition and the bill were first introduced in the House. I started with the date it was ordered enrolled, February 9, but it wasn't there. So I moved back to the first reading of February 7th and found it there. So that's a good example. This example is a great example of finding petitions with committee reports and using your important dates to go back and find the actual date where it ended up being filed. Next, another kind of genealogically important bill is the name alteration and legitimization of Joseph Scott in 1823. I'm just going to map out what I found in the journals. We're not going to go page by page in the journal for these last few examples. So it was first introduced in the Senate on December 4th and passed its first reading, passed the second reading in the Senate on December 5th, and was ordered enrolled on December 6th, then sent to the House on the 8th, passed the first reading, and then it passed the second and third reading on the 19th. I started by looking at the December 6th folder, since that's the date it was ordered enrolled by the Senate, and then tried December 19th, but was unsuccessful. So I went back to the time it was first read, and then I found it in that folder, Senate Bills, December 4th, 1823. Throughout the 19th century, there are a lot of petitions and bills related to the sale of spirituous liquor. Often there will be a separate folder of petitions all related to the subject of liquor. In this example, we're looking for a bill that prevented the sale of liquor within 2 miles of a school in Gates County. Knowing that bills are numbered beginning in 1855 and also separated into public and private, I knew I was looking for something that could potentially be a private bill. I found that it was first introduced in the Senate on January 12th. The approved bill was sent to the House on February 1st, and on February 9th, it was ordered engrossed and was listed as Senate Bill 473. But then I couldn't find it under Senate Bill 473 of the public bills. So is it private? Well, it wasn't under a private bill 473 either. So I had to just start looking through the private Senate bills, where I found that it had been renumbered S84 private. And I think that's the case for a few of the early years when the bills were divided into public and private, that they were actually renumbered after the session if they were private. And you can see that, I pull up a close-up, that you can see the S473 is there, but S84 is the number that it got filed under. One type of petition and bill that you're likely to find often in the session records are requests for the incorporation of schools, towns, and businesses. For the incorporation of Rockford Seminary in 1867, we have the same setup as the previous example, a numbered bill that could potentially be private. Thankfully, this journal is clearer than the 1860 to 61 journal. On first being introduced in the House, it is given the number HP 44, P here standing for private. The assumption is that any regular bill is public. I continued taking notes to make sure that the bill number didn't change and that it wasn't tabled in committee, and found that it was enrolled on February 16th. It was easily located in the House private bills under House Bills Private number 44. In 1873, we don't have to worry about public versus private, and you won't have to for the rest of the time period that we have General Assembly session records for, just bill numbers and where it was introduced. So this bill to regulate the rate of interest in 1873 was first introduced in the Senate and later given the bill number SB 261. However, later in the journal, it's incorrectly called SB 341 before being returned to being called SB 261 again. A good reminder that the journals are not infallible and there are mistakes in them because it was found filed under SB 261. Now, our final example is of another petition. So a few years ago, when I was still working in correspondence in the Public Services Unit, where I did a lot of remote research for patrons, I received a request from a professor looking for what he called the Cherokee Syllabary Petition, a petition from 1843 that was written in both the Cherokee syllabary and English. He had sent a grad student down to look for it, but the graduate student was unsuccessful. My first attempt was also unsuccessful, as I could not find it in the petitions for the 1842 to 43 session. So turning to the journal, I found that it was referred to the Joint Committee on the Removal of Cherokee Indians, that there were many related petitions that were referred to this committee, and that eventually a resolution was presented in the House. However, the Senate did not concur with the resolution. It was ordered laid on the table. But I was able to locate the petition in the House resolutions from January 20 to 28, as the resolution was first introduced on the 21st. It is a remarkable piece of history and a good reminder for our purposes to check those committee folders if you're having trouble finding anything. It's amazing how many times I've thought, well, something just doesn't exist. No, it's just with the committee folders. All right, and before we get to questions, we've covered in a whirlwind how to use information in the journals to increase your research success. But you're not going to be walking into the State Archive stacks and looking at the boxes to see what they say on the outside and see what you need. Enter the card catalog. As we've already discussed, there's only information about the session records from 1709 to 1800 in the online catalog. That data was entered into our old online catalog system when the legislative papers were reprocessed into the General Assembly record group. But data about the materials from 1800 to 1974 is available exclusively in the card catalog. And yes, eventually it will make its way into the online catalog. There's a lot of stuff like that to be done. So we're just gonna see, be patient with us. Now, I said the records were processed through 1992, so what about that time period? Well, honestly, not having a box number is fine. From 1974 to 1992, we only have the bills and resolutions. So all you need to know is Senate or House, bill number, and if it passed or failed. Information you should definitely be able to locate in the journals, and if you give that information to a reference archivist, they should have no trouble locating the record for you. When you get to the search room, take your research that you've done at home from the journals and identify what you need. Go to the card catalog to see more information about what the session holds. Say if the committee reports are divided by subject, if the petitions are divided by subject, etc. And then fill out a call slip. In this example, say I'm looking for a bill that should be dated around December 15, 1830. From the card catalog, I see that those records are in box 2. I take the call slip and fill it out. General Assembly for department, session records for series, under specific record, House Bill December 15th, and volume or box number 2. If you're filling out a call slip for 1974 to 1992, just ignore the box information, that's totally fine, and put the bill number under specific record. So, in summary, the General Assembly session records contain bills, petitions, resolutions, election certificates, and more until about 1900, after which it's primarily bills and resolutions. Information about the collection and specific information about materials, 1709 to 1790, is available in the online catalog. The digital collections contain digitized materials from 1709 to 1814, as well as the House journals, House and Senate journals, that should say, I'm sorry, from 1822 to present. When starting your research, identify whether the bill or resolution you're looking for should be arranged by date or by number, and then find the appropriate information in the journals. The search room card catalog has all the information you need to request the necessary boxes. And remember that there's always going to be those rule breakers. So hopefully that wasn't too fast, but I'm happy to field any questions at this point.
We do have some questions waiting for you, and Anna Allen has her hand up, so I can allow her to talk because I think she may want to, well, maybe that was a mistake with her hand. Okay. So let us know if you do want to ask a question. I think Annie Dance has a question and would like to talk.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for hosting this. This has been helpful. I'm a journalist and researcher, so I understand archives. My mother's actually a historian archivist, and my father's in library administration. So it's a big, big task that y'all are faced with. So for 1992 going forward, can you talk about more, expand on what it not being digitally findable means? I live in Rutherfordton. I'm an hour from Asheville. I'm 4 hours from Raleigh. I do everything remote. So help me do things from home. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the correspondence unit at the State Archives does remote research for patrons. If you are a resident of North Carolina, then there's no charge for us to do the research for you. To look for the records, that is, if you have specific records you're interested in looking for, they'll just invoice you for copies. They can also send PDFs. So I think you were specifically saying the 1992 forward period, and if that's correct, is that correct?
Yeah, so
Or
I cover politics, and
Mhm,
I'm looking more at current lawmakers and what
mhm.
they're saying. If there's Help me understand why it's not findable from 92 till now, is I guess is
Okay,
more questions.
yeah. So records are sent to us on a specific retention schedule. So we don't get them right after they're created, right? We may get them many years later. And then they have to go through a process of being accessioned by the state archives, and then an archivist has to actually look through them all, describe them and everything. And frankly, there are just so many records from so many state agencies that is a process that can take quite a while. And so the records are here, but they are unprocessed. So an archivist hasn't been able to sit down and go through and make sure they're all in the right order or whatever. They're in the same state they were when they were transferred to us, essentially. And so they are still searchable. And the journals, I believe, are still online. I cannot remember how far back the legislative website information goes. But you can take whatever information you have if you're looking for, again, you're going to just be looking at bills and resolutions for that time period as far as session records go, and email us at the archives, and they will take a look at your information and go see if they can find the original records. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have one from the Q&A. This is from Cheryl Chastain. I've looked at committee reports in the period around 1819 relating to the sale of land acquired from the Cherokee Nation. Unfortunately, committee reports for that period don't contain much information beyond the final decision made. Where else could I look for the reasons behind the legislation?
That is a great question. Sometimes the journals might have a little bit of exposition from a senator. Also, oftentimes the governor's messages and the governor would give periodic speeches to the legislature, and a lot of times those can reveal kind of a lot of what's going on in the background. Otherwise, I might also take a look at newspapers from the time period to see if any one is reporting on what's going on. But otherwise, unfortunately, if the drafts that they made weren't recorded, or they didn't take a lot of notes during their meetings or something, then there's not going to be as much information about how they arrived at their decision. Oh, and good point from Josh saying there might be governor's papers. If it's a policy that the governor was involved in, then the governor may have correspondence or other papers that shed more light on that.
So this is a question that came up earlier. Would there be any copyright concerns for these materials? I think as government documents, they're in the public domain, even if they're past the 1920s.
Yeah, no, there shouldn't be any concern. I mean, if you use a scan from our digital collections or something in a publication or anything, we typically just ask that you cite where you got it, and just, say courtesy of the state archives, but there shouldn't be any copyright issues.
Okay, well, I had a couple questions myself, and we're maybe waiting for other people to ruminate on what they want to ask, but you left us in suspense about Eliza Hope Cox.
Oh.
Can you tell us why she was so desperate to go through an act of the legislature to get divorced, and what egregious thing he did that the legislature agreed?
I am really ashamed to say I did not actually read all of that because I was mostly focusing on trying to find examples of particular types of ways of research that came out, but I can maybe I could follow up a little blog post about Eliza Hope Cox.
Sounds great. Okay. So yeah, that's a good plug for our social media.
Usually it's something like abuse, drunkenness, abandonment, that kind of thing. Yeah. That's typically the reasons that come up that are determined reasonable. So,
and then maybe another more serious, not that Eliza's life wasn't serious, but a research question. And that is, you mentioned the petitions are included, and it seems like in various spots, not always in their own folder, but sometimes, until 1931, and then they're no longer included. So what happens to petitions after 1931?
I'm not sure. That is a great question for the research analyst over at the State Records Center, or the description unit as well. I'm not sure why they stopped being saved after 1931. My guess is just the bulk of records. I mean, with every year, right, the population of North Carolina grows, the issues that the government's looking at grow, and just the number of records just keep getting bigger and bigger. Yeah.
Okay, well, we do have another question in the Q&A. And someone is saying, I do genealogy. Where should I look for records? So the big answer is the State Archives is the great place to look.
Yeah, county records are a great place to start with genealogy. At the State Archives, many of those are on Family Search, or, as I mentioned earlier, the correspondence unit, which I'll go ahead and move to the next slide so you can see that this first email, archives@c.gov, is where you can email our reference archivist to see if your remote research is something that they're able to do, or if they're able to give you some more information before you come visit. They're also great people to ask about the more recent materials. Yeah. And then as for genealogy of the General Assembly, you kind of, it's hard to take shots in the dark with it. So you kind of need to know something was going on with your family during a particular time period to then go and see, is there a divorce petition being filed, and etc. But the journals online should be the perfect place to do that.
And then someone else is asking if we have Civil War records.
Absolutely. Yes.
Is there a specific collection for those that you'd recommend?
Well,
it depends on the research question, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for service records, that's a federal matter. But we do have a really extensive military collection for the Civil War, as well as private collections that are related to the Civil War. But the military collection is a really good place to start.
Okay, and we've got some good comments from Josh about why petitions are not included. So check those out in the chat. And Josh is another good contact on our staff for specific government records collections and just general reference questions. So we've got lots of expertise on our staff, but it was wonderful to have Lauren share a bunch of hers. And another good place to start for just a basic question would be our online catalog and type in the name you're looking for. And sometimes you won't find everything, but you may find a number of things related to the specific person that you're hoping to research.
And I think I saw a question in the chat about if this was being recorded. It is. It should be up on YouTube either tomorrow or early next week, along with a link to the handout and links to any link that I talked about during the presentation.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Most of our group stayed and was hardcore about sticking it out through the whole thing. So we appreciate that. And we just appreciate interest in our collection and researching. And we look forward to seeing you more online or in person. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.